There is immense strength in your solitude, and in this video I'm going to be sharing a decade of personal experience as well as a variety of transpersonal psychology on how you can strengthen your own relationship with your soul by being alone, which isn't the same as being lonely. I'm going to give you a 3-part framework to distinguish between soul initiation and soul nurturance, which is the dating phase versus the marriage. Metaphorically speaking, I'm going to show you how to distinguish between auditory, visual, and somatic soul contact, and then we're going to wrap up with a more theological discussion about the difference between the voice of God and the voice of your soul, or maybe the voice of your higher self, the voice of your conscience. And if we can provide any theoretical frameworks to help you distinguish, honestly, it's not necessary. But if you are intellectually oriented, you might want to try and decide what is the external Godhead speaking inwards this way, and what is the monadic, let's call it the soul element. It's going too deep. We'll come into it later on. For the sake of this video, I'm going to share 10 years worth of experience. I'm going to share dozens of transpersonal psychology perspectives, which is an 80-year-old tradition. You could call it spiritual science, but it goes much deeper than that, and give you probably about 20 minutes of guidance to properly develop soul contact. It's a very exciting video. I've got so much I could say here, but let's start with the basic between initiation and nurturance. If you aren't yet at the stage where you feel like you've got a reliable relationship with your conscience, your soul, or maybe the voice of God, it's likely that you're missing the initiation. Traditionally speaking, this would be a baptism or other religious ceremony, for example, a bar mitzvah, or maybe an initiation in a tribal culture where the boy goes out into the woods and comes back a man, or the girl gets her first menstruation and she is now a woman, and the ceremony and ritual around those occasions. In our contemporary society, we're more or less lacking in this level of religious framework or this depth of sincerity around our religiosity and the sanctity of initiation, which means that we don't really have soul contact as our default. I wouldn't retroactively assume that people in earlier years had soul contact. In fact, the majority of human history was very difficult and very challenging, and moments of religiosity and piousness and the great saints of history, they're very, 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 very small in number compared to the mass of humankind. But the opportunity that we have, because of the resources that we have access to, and the sheer complexity of the society that we have, where we can draw upon different religions and spiritual traditions from around the world, is that we can initiate ourselves to some degree. Traditional initiation ceremonies are few and far between, but there's these men's groups and women's groups, or different breathwork retreats, different meditation retreats, darkness retreats. For me, I did a lot of fasting. I did somewhere between 20, 25, 30 water fasts over a period of about 3 or 4 years. And if you ever want to try and listen to the voice of your conscience or the voice of your soul, try not eating for 2, 3, 4, or 5 days. And if you really want to amplify it, try not drinking any water for 2 or 3 days as well. You will be in a very different state of consciousness. But fundamentally, we're talking about initiation. The initiation is going on the first date. To initiate into soul contact is going for a camping trip in the woods with your best friend, or going away on a weekend getaway with a lover. It's a moment of great ecstasy, a moment of meeting for the first time. But it's not the relationship, it's not the marriage. You're not yet married to the voice of your soul. You don't have true reliable contact in terms of visualization, auditory input, or somatic sensation arising from the guts to the mind, not just the mind flowing downwards. You need to form the marriage. There usually needs to be one initiation at the start. If you haven't initiated, there's a variety of ways to go about this. You need to look at initiation rituals. I can't cover them in detail in this video. Make sure that you've initiated, and also expect that there'll be different moments, usually on about a 3 to 6 year timeline, where you'll have mini initiations and maybe one particularly large initiation in your late adulthood. For some people, this can mean returning to the faith that they were born into. For others, it's moving out of the faith that they were born into. Or it can have a variety of very challenging initiations where you have a crisis of health. Unfortunately, people get very serious diseases, and then they get mystical experiences, they get revelations. You get the idea. Initiation at the start, periodic initiations, but let's focus on the nurturance, because this is where it really relates to solitude. If you want to build a marriage with your soul, and you want to have the ability to listen to the wisdom from within, or again, the wisdom from God, if you swing that way in terms of your theological framework. You need to focus on building a relationship. And the easiest way to frame this is build a relationship with your soul in the same way that you look after the relationship with your best friend or with a romantic partner. It's not the same level of intensity in terms of human time. You don't need to put in the same amount of hours, but you do need to put in the same amount of care. When you're alone with yourself, reading in the morning or in the evening, you're out for a walk by the seaside or in the forest, imagine your soul walking beside you. You could be holding hands and skipping, or you could be soberly walking together, pacing across whatever thoughts you might be thinking, but you can ask very directly, what do you think I should do? What do I know I should do? What would I say I should do if I was in contact with the deepest part of myself? And this is where it gets tricky. Later on, we're going to talk about the distinctions between God and soul and higher self and intuition more broadly. But develop that relationship. If you don't take this as seriously as you would the relationship with your best friend or your romantic partner, you won't be able to draw the many, many, many benefits of soul contact, which I've experienced on an increasingly more vitalized level over the last 10 years. There's a tricky aspect to this though, and based on my personal bias, I will need to share my story as it is, because I'd be lying to you if I presented something theological or theoretical rather than my lived experience. You're going to have to make a variety of sacrifices to build that relationship in a reliable and sustainable way. This isn't just hippie woo-woo nonsense. I've personally found the greatest benefit in my soul contact because I've been sober, because I've eaten organic foods, because I go and train at the gym, and I've built my life, I've built this business, I've built my teaching, I've built my client coaching work with intention based on the feedback that I've received throughout the years. I had moments of personal revelation during my late teens and early 20s where I knew I needed to do what I'm doing now. It's kind of a weird thing to read probably 700 plus books at this stage in such a short period of time. I personally believe that there's a bit of a God-given inspiration there, and I feel very fortunate that I've got that energy inside me. But that energy would be a spark which is lost in the wind if I didn't refuse to not drink or do drugs or party for 5 years. It's not just living like a monk. I'm not saying that you need to go monk mode and that's the only way to make it work, but if you have information which has been given to you and you know it's going to be a great ambition or a great benefit that you could bring forwards into the world, or even just a loving relationship with yourself, I don't experience negative self-talk and hating internal language. That's not to brag. I'm just sharing the truth. If you want to receive the blessing of God or the blessing of your soul, that love from within, that real, tangible self-love, you need to behave in a loving way. You have to be loving. You have to do loving things. There have to be conditions and boundaries. It's this idea of conditional masculine love in the best sense possible, the healthy father energy. And of course, the healthy mother energy. You need to spend time with your soul. This is why people like fasting or going for retreats or spending time in meditation and prayer. You're nurturing the relationship over the decades of your life, but don't expect that you'll be able to build a wonderful relationship without sacrifices and compromise. In the same way that you have with your best friends and with romantic partners, there's a give and take. The energetic commitment needs to be there. It's not a dozen hours per week. It could be a meditation practice or a prayer practice once per day. It could be certain rituals on the weekend, or maybe once per month doing an intentional weekend of self-reflection and self-contact. But do expect that you'll need sacrifices if you truly want to maximize your ability to listen within, and we're going to move on to the auditory, visual, and somatic sensations in a moment. Have the right structure in place. If you're inviting your best friend over, don't expect that they're going to enjoy being in your presence or stay for very long if your home is a mess, dishes haven't been done, and it smells like crap. Your body needs to be the same vessel. Don't expect that you'll get anything more than those peak experiences, those glimpses of possibility, the firework in the night, unless you create the conditions for the bonfire which can last you through the decades. Strongly said, but I truly believe this. If you have any sense of resonance with what I'm saying, I'm not trying to brag, I'm not trying to be prideful, I'm not trying to put people down who don't have this. I have a very particular type of lifestyle, but it's because I value the beauty of this internal feeling with myself more than any of those trivialities and, honestly, in my opinion, waste of time, waste of energy, and degradation of myself and my soul kind of activities. I'm not perfect with this, but more or less you need to create a nice home for your soul to want to participate in, or you might be dissociative and disconnected. As I've shared many times on this channel, I was like that between about 10 and 22 in the final, but especially in my childhood and early teenage years. The soul will anchor you back into the flesh, but you need a material realm for the soul to want to enter back into if you're dissociated and connected. Let's move on into the next stage of the video, which is talking about the 3 different types, or at least the 3 main types of soul contact. Not everybody will hear the voice of their soul in terms of a direct revelation via their ears. Other people won't see visions or have revelations, and some people won't have this sense of heart opening or deep instinctual gut knowing, or even a genital knowing, which is crazy to think about. But if you're aware of the power of intimate energy, you can have a full rush of I'm here and I'm alive when you're in contact with your soul, and it can mean something like this or something like that, a flower blossoming, or maybe a pine tree growing in the forest, if you catch the metaphor. There's many different responses you can have. You can have joy, most obviously, right? No need to make it all lower body, which you can't see. It's the joy in the face. It's the lightness of the eyes. That's the somatic voice of the soul if you pay attention and listen. Not everyone will get all 3. You can develop the skill to be able to work through all 3. I'm going to share 3 books with you right at the end that will support your journey in this. What I recommend you start with is go with your strengths. If you're like me and you are someone who dreams a lot and you're very imaginative and you have a quite rich fantasy life, it's likely that when you're in moments of reflection, which could mean reading in the porch for me, or reading out somewhere in a beautiful cozy space, or somewhere in nature, you start to see things. Suddenly you're thinking about a moment from the past, or you're imagining where you could be 5 years in the future. Is that just a fantasy, or is that potentially God, your soul, your higher self, your conscience, using the language of metaphor and visualization to give you a strong message that captures your attention and gives you good feelings? It's not just an idle daydream. You can go deeper into this if you do active imagination and you do visual meditation work. I did a recent post over in the community section about daydreams. If you want to read that, go onto my page, click onto community, and you'll see how to work with daydreams. And arguably it's better than working with just night dreams. You can drop into visual states. And the visual states, if you're open to the idea, could be influenced by a bit of a deeper wisdom within, or something divine from without. Maybe we blur the boundaries eventually. Pay attention to what you're looking at. Pay attention to what you're hearing. For me personally, I've had dozens, is fair to say, I'm not sure how many, probably over 20 moments that are memorable that I've tracked in journals where I've heard very direct statements. It's usually very direct. For me personally, if I'm hearing the voice of my soul, they're usually single sentences. It's a single sentence said with the power and conviction and love, for me, of the healthy grandfather, or a truly loving higher self energy, which is nonetheless different from just an egoic identity. It feels like it's a voice from somewhere else, and yet it's deeply me at the same time. A sentence comes in, not this way, do it this way. A different sentence comes in, try going there. Another one comes in, go over there. It's very directional for me, but I'm also a man. I know that when I've worked with female clients, they've had very feminine style soul voices. I don't know about the theological specifics. Some people would say that the man has a feminine soul and the woman has a masculine soul. I don't necessarily think that the soul is gendered in the terms that we're speaking of. You can go into Jungian psychology and look at the anima and animus, but even then, the anima and animus aren't to be equated with the soul, and that is a misunderstanding of the concept. But you'll notice the voice. If you've heard the voice and you feel the extrasensory power of those words, and this is where the somatic element comes in, you know you're in contact with something that isn't quite you, but is you in the deepest sense possible. The final place to look out for is people who don't look towards their soul. They don't see visions, they don't hear things, but you might get a feeling in the heart. Usually it's a triple mixture. It's a heart, a head, and a gut knowing. All 3 of those line up at once. It's almost like you turn up the saturation, you turn up the brightness, and everything illuminates together. It's like in the film Limitless, when he takes the pill and everything, all the neurons fire and everything comes in and he goes, boom. Something like that at a very low grade level when you're in contact with deep truth. For clients that I've worked with, they've had experiences where they've broken into spontaneous laughter. They've had experiences where they're just breaking out into dance, and it seems like, well, that seems a bit ridiculous. How do you know that you're in the voice of your soul if you're breaking out into dance? But you're in a constant relationship with your soul if you truly take this to the theoretical extreme. Your soul is never absent, therefore your soul is always listening, and there's a possibility of being in more or less consistent communication with your soul if you pause to listen. But also it's having the spaciousness in a busy day to realize that when you made a good decision, for example, you chose to forgive somebody, or you chose to be nice to somebody, or you chose to put in the extra hours to do something that was meaningful rather than distracting and degrading your consciousness with waste of time activities like this or doing things like this, you get responses. You'll feel that it was a good choice. Your heart will lift up. You'll feel prideful in the best way possible. You'll feel respectful of yourself. You'll feel pleased with your decisions, and you'll feel like you did something loving. That's tied into the soul voice in my perspective. Somatic, coming up, being here, being felt. My hands already feel a sense of charge talking about it. Visions of what could be, what has been, and stories from different dimensions, different realms, different narratives, they could all be tied back in if you decipher the symbolism to something which is trying to be communicated with you. And the same for direct language, which is a more rare experience for most people, but if you're fortunate enough to get direct inflow, please pay attention to it and please listen to those very strong words. It's not happening just as a regular thought form. It's something very special. It is worth reminding before going into this final section of how do we distinguish between God and soul and the higher self and your conscience. Please make sure that your home is clean and tidy to the best degree possible, 80%, 90%. I mentioned sobriety earlier. For me, that's been fantastic. I mentioned fasting, which was literally, from a biological level, what you're doing in a fast is you're increasing the autophagy process somewhere between around hour 30 and hour 40. The cell renewal within the cell starts to kick up, so all of the old fragmented debris inside of the cell then gets cleaned out and absorbed. It's fascinating if you look into it. There's a literal renewal. There's a death and rebirth process at a cellular level when you go into extended fasting states. And if you match that with a spiritual intention, let's say, of your mind, and an open-hearted, loving intention from your heart, you'll get so much out of these experiences. But you need to create the conditions for those mini initiations and the nurturing which goes on for the decades. Final obvious point, but I haven't mentioned it yet, you need to do trauma work. My channel is primarily focused on self-actualization and self-healing towards the higher bands of human potential. But to get to the higher bands, you need to have cleaned out a lot of the gunk and darkness and shadows from the past. You can't expect that you'll be able to go as far as you want and love yourself as deeply as you deserve if you've got those old negative thought forms and traumas of the past clogging up your space, like literal psychic debris and anxious thought forms just get in the way of hearing your soul. It's very practical. It's not to be shaming towards anyone. It's just a necessary step, and it's almost like it's guaranteed. I'll leave it there for now. Made many videos on this. Tell you what, before we go into the final section of the video, if you've been enjoying this so far, I will give you books as a reward. Maybe I won't even timestamp this. This is just a reward for watching the video and paying attention. These are 3 books. 2 of them I recommend very frequently. One of them is the first time mentioned on the channel, I believe, but both of these are in the Shadow Work library. So they're in Module 9 on transpersonal psychology and building your intuition at the higher levels. I spend about 3 hours talking about this concept and going through a variety of exercises. I've got great feedback on these exercises, but here's some free books for now. You can join me in the Shadow Work library if you want to go into them in more detail. But From Intellect to Intuition by Alice Bailey, this is without a doubt the most comprehensive book on how to build your intuition. If you're an intelligent, academically oriented, and generally philosophically minded individual, you will appreciate the blend between theory and practice in what I believe to be the best book on intuition. I've read probably 10 books targeted on building your intuition. 7 of them are in the garage. They've been banished because they're honestly just too new age and kind of ambiguous and fluffy. This one stood the test of time from the 1940s. Go for this book. And if you're looking for high-quality transpersonal psychology, a field which has been 80 years in the making, and you're looking for spiritual science which is real, go for Embodied Spirituality in a Sacred World by Michael Washburn. Michael Washburn is without a doubt one of the greatest transpersonal psychologists, and I'm looking forwards to reading his recent book, which came out only a month or so ago. This one. Look at this. This is all about ego psychology and integrating higher personal power. It's going to be good. I haven't even read it yet, but I know this is going to be... It might be one of his last books as well, so just an aside there. But read Michael Washburn. And final book that I haven't mentioned on this channel before. This is very out there. This will open up your mind to a variety of perspectives. Read Psyche's Veil by Terry Marks Tarlow. This book is fascinating because Psyche's Veil is written by a therapist for therapists as a way of doing a variety of transpersonally oriented work, some would say, in the quantum realms. I hate using that word because of how it's been misappropriated and misused. There's a variety of actual quantum science from quantum physicists rather than popularizers over there, which you never see. I don't really teach on that stuff, but if you really want to go into it and you want to see how it's applied therapeutically applied soul work when you're open to non-dualistic ideas, read Psyche's Veil, Embodied Spirituality in a Sacred World, and From Intellect to Intuition. And the final point that I can make in this video about the differentiation between God and soul, between conscience, higher consciousness, and higher self, or between inner wisdom or any archetypal figure between your anima and your animus, is that I don't know either. I've spent hundreds of hours trying to find the answer. I could present a variety of different theories and perspectives. I don't know. What I know is that when I'm in moments of solitude and calm and centeredness, and when I'm living more or less aligned with my values, there's a cohesion between my idea of who I should be and what I'm actually doing on a daily basis. I come into more frequent contact with what I believe to be the voice of my soul, but at other times I say is the presence of God. I like those language constructs. Some people strongly dislike those types of words, and they call it their higher self or the universe. I think you're missing out on some of the depth of the literature if you make it too broad into the universe. I think the specificity, especially if you read a book like From Intellect to Intuition, which is wonderfully specific, does count and does enhance the relationship. It feels more personal to have a relationship with your soul rather than a relationship with the universe. That's just me trying to make this something which is practical. I'd rather be able to have my soul as my best friend or my married partner, metaphorically speaking, than all of the cosmos and all of the stars, because I suffer historically from dissociation and depersonalization and derealization. For me, it's a process of becoming cohesive and then creating tangible relationships within and without, rather than a dissipated relationship where we all dissolve into the cuddle puddle of God. Bit of an aside. It doesn't work for me personally. If it works for you, fantastic. You don't need to stress yourself out too much on the process of defining and delineating. And yet I've also done that for many years. So please just pay attention. Interesting moment. I just got deja vu. Deja vu for the first time in a while. Deja vu, some people would say, is linked to being on the right path and having been in contact with truth. Let's end it there. Let's end the video. Read the books. If you've enjoyed this type of video, you're going to love what I do in the Shadowwork Library, because I get 3 hours to talk about these concepts throughout different modules. There's a lot in there. I don't get to do it on YouTube because it's a bit too advanced, but I'll leave it there. Comment down below if you want more of this, and be well, and be with your soul. It's a more powerful guide, more powerful teacher than anyone you could find on YouTube. And I want you to experience that. Enjoy.